Hey guys, this is a response video for a request for help with a city builder project in Unreal 5 with the Dynamic NavMesh with modifiers only. So the request was that they were having trouble with pawns walking around on the NavMesh or trying to select a pawn and give him direct inputs to either go to a location or a building. So everything seems to be working. So it doesn't seem like there's an inherent glitch in Unreal 5 or the NavMesh. We can see that the NavMesh is updating. The pawns are able to walk around. We can give them movement commands. We can remove buildings or objects, and the NavMesh will update appropriately. And we can add them back, and we can see that the nav modifier creates a null area so they know not to walk in that area. So let's go ahead and take a look at some things that might be causing a glitch if you're experiencing one.
Okay, from your request, it sounded like you were having a hard time with your pawns walking around on the level. And like I said earlier, there's no inherent flaw with the NavMesh or Unreal 5. So this is usually caused by a conflict between your player controller and your AI controller, or you might not have a reference set correctly. And lastly, it might be that your movement command is being fired multiple times. So I'll go ahead and take a look at each one of these scenarios and see if that can help you out.
Okay, let's just start with the first example where you might be having a conflict between your player controller and your AI controller. So for this, we'll just do a basic setup. We'll start here on the game mode, and rather than define my player pawn here in the default classes, I'll just leave it as none, and instead I'll come over here and create an empty variable, and this will be updated for the currently selected pawn. So let's go over to the blueprint for the pawns. And whenever I click on a pawn to select it, he'll automatically cast to the player controller, and he'll run this function to have himself set as the currently selected pawn. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. And this function will automatically update that variable on the game mode, designating this pawn as the currently selected one, and any input commands given by the player controller can only go to that pawn. And when I'm trying to give it input from the player controller, it will automatically update a boolean on the AI controller that I named override. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. And while this pawn is receiving input from the player controller, the boolean will prevent it from receiving input from the AI controller. And so that's just a quick and easy way that you can prevent a conflict between the two. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the next example. Okay, in this example, we want to check if all of our references are set correctly. And I'm going to use some print strings to help me troubleshoot this. So here on the AI controller, we want to set a reference to the pawn that he is possessing, and we want to use that reference later on in some of his movement commands. So let's go ahead and start the game. And we'll spawn in a character, and we can see that he's not moving, and it says that our ref is not valid. So let's exit and go back to the AI controller. And to see why his pawn reference is coming back empty, I'll go ahead and hook this print string up. And then we'll go over to the pawn blueprint, and I'll hook this one up as well. And then let's compile and save, and we'll start the game. And we can see that the AI controller is spawning in before the pawn does, and that's why the ref is coming back as not valid. So to fix this, let's go back to the AI controller. And instead of setting the ref from here, we'll go over to the pawn blueprint, and we'll set it after he calls to be possessed, and we'll check that out in game and see if that fixes it. And we can see that the AI controller and the pawn spawn in order, and the ref is valid, and the character can walk around just fine again. Okay, let's go on to the next example. Okay, and in this last example, we want to check if your movement function is firing multiple times, and there's a couple different ways that this can happen. For example, your movement function might be chained to another function, and the logic in between might be creating an unintentional loop. Another example would be if the movement function is chained to event tick. So in the example we're using here, we have the movement function chained to another function, and the initial function is off of event tick, and then there is this basic check to see if the character is still moving, and if he's not, then he's free to call the move command again. But if we unhook this real quick and we check it out in game, and we can see that the movement command is being called multiple times, and it's causing him to have an unusual walk cycle. So we'll go back to the AI controller, and we'll make sure that this branch is hooked up. And now he has to complete his first movement before he's allowed to call his next movement. So let's go ahead and save and compile that and check it out in game. And so now we can see that the movement command can only be called once the character finishes his current move. Okay, after troubleshooting your project, you should be able to load in your static and moving objects. You should also be able to load in your different characters who can navigate around the map using the AI controller. You should also be able to select your characters and give them direct controls with the player controller. And in a future video series, we'll go through how to create a city builder from start to finish. But in the meantime, I hope this troubleshooting version helped. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in another video.